Barely a week ago, a sense of inevitability hung over the US presidential election. Donald Trump's allies gleefully predicted a landslide victory during a Republican National Convention. Democrats were desperate and listless and feared the worst as a diminished President Joe Biden clung to his party's nomination. Then Vice President Kamala Harris stepped in for Biden and quickly smashed fundraising records. She raised over $200 million in a few hours. She took over social media. She's generated the kind of excitement that some Democrats are comparing with President Barack Obama's historic candidacy over 15 years ago. Now, with just over 90 days to election day, there's a new race taking shape in the United States, featuring a new candidate, a new issue focus, and a new outlook for both parties, Democrats and Republicans. We're asking these questions today. Can Kamala Harris win? How can Trump counter Kamala Harris? What are the opinion polls in the US saying right now? What are the implications for the world from these elections? And finally, how divided is America? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Badrul Alam, former professor of political science and international affairs at JMI, Nirmal Abraham, political analyst and US expert, and my colleague Justin Thomas continues to join me in the studio. Justin, a week is a long time in politics, and 2 weeks is like a lifetime. Exactly. You never predicted the kind of candidacy that we are seeing right now. Kamala Harris back in the race, and it's like a 50-50 election, they're saying.
I think from the perspective that I see is that I think Kamala Harris has an upper hand.
Right.
Because if you see the Democrat voters list that have increased by, Trump lost by about 2 million last time, and Democrats added almost like 3 to 4 millions more into their voters list, the ones who are marked as Democratic voters. So from that perspective, they have the establishment in terms of the businesses where they have spread their tentacles very strongly, where they are getting funded $200 million. I think $200 million.
$200 million
in just days, and that clearly indicates that the kind of backing that they had.
Yes.
The Democrats were already expecting a second term for Joe Biden.
Right.
It's only that disaster that happened during the debate that took them by surprise, but they are back on track, and I think it's Trump who has to capture the White House rather than the other way around.
Yes, it's now looking increasingly difficult for former President Donald Trump, and I'm going to ask Dr. Badrul Alam this. Dr. Alam, Nari Shakti in the United States, Kamala Harris literally neck and neck with President Donald Trump. How do you see her chances as the next President of the United States, the first woman candidate for the United States?
Thank you very much. I still think at this point of time, Kamala Harris seems to be the odds-on favorite. But I would also use a bit of caution in terms of the polls that we get from NBC, Wall Street Journal, ABC News, CNN, etc. I can give you just very quickly 2 or 3 examples. In 1948 election between Harry Truman, a Democrat, and Tom Dewey, a Republican, it was so close that nobody knew exactly what will come about. And the day of the election result came out, the Chicago Tribune came out with that famous caption, Dewey defeats Truman. And so Truman was gleefully showing that to the world, it is Truman who won. Right. In 1960 election, John F. Kennedy squeezed past Richard Nixon by just few thousand votes at the very end. And in 1984. So there are many elections. And also you talked about Barack Obama. Barack Obama's first election was a pretty landslide kind of thing. But the second election, till a week before the election, he was in fact trailing behind Mitt Romney. And in 2016 also, if you recollect, Hillary Clinton at this point of time, 3 months ahead of the election, she was ahead of Donald Trump by 6 to 8 points. But in the election that happened in November, she lost to Donald Trump. So I think I will take it with a bit of caution. But yes, I do agree that in terms of the popular vote in last election in 2020 and 16, both Hillary beat Trump. But in American election, it's all about who can get 270 out of 538 electoral college. So I think again it comes to those 6 or 7 swing states as to who can swing and what advantage.
Absolutely. And Nirmal Abraham, it's a 50-50 election as what they're calling it right now. It earlier appeared that Trump was going to win by a landslide if Joe Biden were the candidate. But right now, it looks like it could go either way. It could either be Kamala Harris or it could be Donald Trump. But you know, the larger issue what we've discussed in our News9 Plus story as well is the fact that how deeply polarized the United States is. It's not a pole, it's actually polarization that's being talked about. The kind of rhetoric that's emerging out of the United States makes our elections look very sane and very, what can I say, very democratic in that sense. But the kind of harsh language that's being used by both the Republicans and the Democrats, what does this actually talk about the state of American society today?
It is very polarized, and I'm a little bit surprised by the polls, by the uptick in the numbers for Harris, because I saw a CNN poll that said that among independent voters, the favorability came up from 28% to 44% for Harris in a span of 1 week. I'm not sure what she has done or said substantially to make that kind of a jump. But yeah, I mean, the question is basically this, or the equation is basically this. In the US, there are people who love Trump, and there are people who hate Trump. And there are people who are in between the independents. I think a lot depends on what the independents decide, because the people who are going to vote for Trump, no matter what Trump does, how many times he goes to jail or what he does, they don't care. They will still vote for Trump. The people who hate Trump, regardless of who the candidate is, let it be Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, or even Joe Biden, I would say that they would still vote for the Democratic Party, not for the candidate. But the independence is where I think Trump needs to focus on right now, because if you look at the RNC speech of Trump right after the assassination attempt, if you look at his demeanor in that, in the speech that he gave and his, general outlook in the day, you could see a sense of gentleness about Trump, a sense of kindness about him that we usually don't see. And I think that's the approach he needs to take forward to get the independents. The MAGA voters, the conservatives, they are with him. He doesn't have to appeal to them anymore. He needs to appeal to the independents, and if he does, it will change. Plus, the polls right now does not indicate the right picture, because the polls right now are an indication of public perception, what appears in the news, the open statements that each candidate makes. But when they get to the debate stage, these statements will be questioned. Their opinions will be challenged. For example, if Kamala Harris says, I am here to stand for the victims, he would ask her, what about the victims in Palestine? If she talks about the economy, he would ask her, what about inflation that came up 3 times? Why are gas prices twofold now? He would ask those questions. Similarly, for Harris, she could point blank ask his opinion on abortion, which could negatively affect Trump as well. So I think a lot depends on how the debates go, the to and fro exchange that we are all waiting to see. That's when I think the polls actually matter.
Right, absolutely. But as of now, Justin, it looks like it could go either way as we've been talking. It's just like neck and neck, literally, both Trump and Kamala Harris. And Trump actually looks like the old man now, right? He's almost 80, and he's up against a candidate who's 20 years his junior. But of course, Kamala Harris also inherits the anti-incumbency of the Biden administration.
She does. And Trump, after the assassination bid on him, there have been obviously a lot of sympathy wave. The question is that how long can you hold that sympathy wave?
Yes.
And also, because if you see, I just wanted to give a comparison, like for example, the Indian elections, the Ram Temple issue, when that thing came up, everyone was gung-ho about the fact that it's going to be a landslide for Modi government, which never happened. So again, these things tend to change very quickly and very fast at the ground level. And as our guest just mentioned, the issues like abortion, the issues like illegal
gas
immigrations,
prices,
that Kamala is on back foot, because she was the designated person to handle the border issue, but she never came through. In fact, they're trying to push through a bill where they're trying to ensure that the illegal migrants become voters, and that's being played up by the Republicans, saying, see, this is their agenda, that's what they're trying, just to win the election, they can just go to any extent. So clearly, both sides have issues where they can play in front foot to ensure to push down the opponent, and this makes it more interesting as to who's going to come on top at the end of the day.
Right.
And right now, Trump and Kamala Harris are on equal terms when that comes to fore.
Almost neck and neck, but as Nirmal Abraham pointed out, that it's going to be the debates that are literally going to swing the undecided voters, and that's what both sides will be looking at. But I want to ask Dr. Alam this: how is the world looking at it right now, Dr. Alam? These US elections, possibly every US election matters because the US president is the most powerful individual in the world. And what he says or does matters greatly for the rest of the world. But how is the world really looking at these two alternatives, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
I think at this point of time, since we have already seen the first term of Donald Trump and also Kamala Harris as a vice president to Joe Biden for the last 4 years, I think what we see is a more predictable pattern in terms of, I think if Trump comes back, if it is Trump 2, for example, we'll see America first, make America great again, pulling out from the Paris climate change talks, not putting all eggs in NATO basket, taking a different views on Ukraine, not being that receptive to the Indo-Pacific architecture, etc., etc. If the Kamala Harris comes, I think definitely there will be more support for the Ukraine things, for the NATO things, for the climate change, etc. So I think broadly speaking, I think we can see some systemic differences. As far as China is concerned, I think both sides will have a very hard stance on China. But again, there may be some nuanced changes here and there as far as even China is concerned. So I think broadly, we have seen that whether it's a Democrat or a Republican at the White House, basically the world remains the same. It would like to be a unipolar world. It would like to be a dominant player. It would like to be a hegemon. But having said that, in terms of the nitty-gritty details, there may be changes here and there between hardcore Republicans like Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, a Democrat.
Right, absolutely. Nirmal Abraham, how do you see the world reacting to what could be a inward-looking United States under Trump and more of the same under Kamala Harris, literally a second term for Joe Biden, as some argue?
Right. I think now there are a couple of issues at stake as far as outward looking is concerned, because unlike the last election, now we have a couple of issues. One is the Russia-Ukraine war. Trump has promised that he can actually have a war with Putin and put an end to this in a week. We don't know if that's true or not, but that's something that it's at stake. The Israel-Palestine war is something that it's at stake. And so there are issues outside of the US that the US can solve. And it is a question that remains. Who will solve is a question that remains. Secondly, I think Trump is, a lot of people were of the impression earlier that Trump was anti-immigration. That has gone away now. Just as Justin pointed out rightly, it's a question of anti-illegal immigration. Even immigrants from Kerala, from my state, or from anywhere across India who go to the United States through a proper channel, waiting in lines, filling out the forms, going through the background checks, and getting there in about 10 to 12 years after a lot of hardship. Right. They understand why Trump is talking about illegal immigration. Yes. They understand the democratic agenda. So those are questions at stake as well. As far as inward-looking US is concerned, yes, that will be there. America first is a caption that he will still stick on to. But there are wars. There is the China-Taiwan tension, the growth of China, all of which is even bound to affect India as well. So I think for the world, this is a much more important election than the 2020 or 2016 elections combined.
Absolutely. The most important election possibly of this year and possibly of the last couple of years. But thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Alam, Nirmal Abraham, and my colleague Justin Thomas.